Everyone thinks we survived the Ice Age because we were tough, because we had fire and fur and caves and grit. That answer is comforting, it's popular, and it is almost entirely wrong. The truth is that the Ice Age nearly erased us. Our entire species squeezed down to a few thousand shivering survivors, and we clawed our way back by doing something no cornered animal should ever do. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what that unthinkable thing was, and why the humans who were stronger, warmer, and better built for the cold died out instead of us. Start with how close it actually got. Somewhere in the last 100,000 years, the human population didn't just shrink, it collapsed. Geneticists reading the DNA of everyone alive today keep hitting the same wall, a bottleneck so narrow that the entire ancestry of 8 billion people funnels through perhaps a few thousand breeding individuals. Not a few thousand per continent, a few thousand total. Every human who has ever lived since is descended from a group that could have fit inside a single modern stadium with seats to spare. We were, by any honest measure, an endangered species. So what was squeezing us that hard? The world itself had turned against us. At the peak of the last glaciation around 20,000 years ago, ice sheets 2 miles thick sat on top of what is now Chicago, Stockholm, and Manchester. So much water was locked into that ice that sea levels dropped by more than 100 meters, coastlines crawled outward, and the climate didn't just get colder, it got violently unstable. Grasslands turned to deserts of dust, forests shrank back into thin refuges, and the temperature could lurch by several degrees inside a single human lifetime. This is the world we almost didn't walk out of. But the cold in the air wasn't the thing killing us. Because here's what the tough and gritty story gets wrong. Fire, fur, and shelter are real, and ancient humans had all of them. They wore tailored, fitted clothing sewn with eyed needles. They kept hearths burning. They took over caves. They rendered animal fat into fuel. And none of it was enough on its own. Because every one of those tools solves the same narrow problem. Staying warm tonight, in this spot, with what happens to be around you. They keep one body alive for one winter. They do absolutely nothing about the problem that actually breaks a species, and that problem wasn't the cold in the air, it was the cold in the calendar. Think about what an Ice Age landscape does to food. The herds that fed you, reindeer, horse, mammoth, didn't stay put. They chased the thawing grass, and the grass followed a climate that had stopped keeping its promises. A valley that fed 40 people one autumn could be bare rock the next. A river thick with salmon could simply not arrive. You could do everything right, master every skill, keep your fire burning flawlessly, and still watch your children starve because the animals had walked somewhere else. The land didn't fail once. It failed unpredictably, everywhere, forever. So how do you survive a place that might turn lethal at any moment? You can't if you're alone. A single band, sealed inside its own territory, is a bet placed on one patch of ground. And in the Ice Age, every patch of ground eventually loses. Move too far and you collide with someone else's hunting range. Stay put and you die when your luck runs out. This is the wall that killed off competitors far more capable than us. Because there was another kind of human already living through these winters, one built for the cold in ways we simply were not. And by every measurement of the body, they should have been the ones to survive. They didn't. Their name was Neanderthal. Neanderthals were the cold weather specialists, barrel-chested, thick-boned, wrapped in muscle, with wide noses built to warm, freezing air before it reached the lungs. They had fire. They had spears that could drop a bison. They had brains as large as ours, sometimes larger. If surviving the Ice Age were purely a contest of toughness, of fur and grit and raw strength, they should have won it walking away. Yet their tools tell a strange, quiet story. When archaeologists trace where a Neanderthal's stone came from, it almost always came from close by. Their entire world fit inside a short walk. And that, it turns out, was the flaw that killed them. Now look at what our ancestors were doing at the very same time. Dig into a single Homo sapiens campsite from this period and you find things that have no business being there. Seashells, hundreds of kilometers from any sea. Amber, flint, and obsidian that had traveled distances a person could not walk in a single season. Beads carved from shell and ivory, drilled and strung and clearly meant to be worn. To a hungry species on the edge of extinction, this looks insane. Why haul pretty useless objects across a frozen continent when every calorie matters? Unless those objects weren't useless at all. Because they weren't decoration. They were memory made portable, proof of a relationship with someone far away. When you handed a stranger a carved bead and they handed one back, you weren't trading trinkets. You were opening an account. You were writing, into an object, a promise. If your land fails, you can come to mine. Anthropologists call this social storage. You cannot stockpile meat against a bad decade. It rots. But you can stockpile obligations. You can turn a surplus in a good year into a favor owed in a distant valley, kept in reserve for the year everything collapses. Food spoils. A relationship keeps. But is that really how it worked, or just a tidy story? We know it worked because it is still being done. Among the Jew Hoansi of the Kalahari, the anthropologist Polly Weissner documented a system called HX0, a web of gift exchange in which people spend a lifetime handing arrows, beads, and tools back and forth with partners scattered across enormous distances. The gifts themselves barely matter. What matters is that when drought hits one waterhole, its people already have the right to walk 60, 100 miles, and be fed by partners they've been quietly investing in for years. It is not charity. It is insurance, paid in relationships, decades before the disaster ever arrives. The exact thing those Ice Age beads were buying. Now go back to the Neanderthals and their short walk. Their stone came from nearby because their social world was small, tight, loyal, local bands that mostly kept to themselves. When their valley emptied, they had no distant partner to run to. No account opened 3 ridges over. No stranger who owed them a winter. They were tough, and they were alone. And in the Ice Age, alone is a death sentence written slowly. Our ancestors weren't stronger than them. We were more connected. Our stone traveled 6 times farther than theirs, not because we walked more, but because we knew more people. And that difference points straight at the unthinkable thing we did to survive. Here it is. Cornered, starving, cut down to a few thousand survivors, we did the one thing every survival instinct screams against. We gave our food away. To people we were not related to, might never see again, and had every reason to fear. We handed our surplus to outsiders and we trusted them to hand it back years later, in a crisis we couldn't predict, when we'd have nothing left to offer but our own need. No other animal facing extinction does this. A cornered creature hoards, defends, and turns on strangers. We did the opposite. We survived the coldest chapter in human history not by becoming harder, but by learning to depend on people we had no reason to trust. And that instinct never left. Every time you trust a stranger to hold up their end of a deal, you're running software the Ice Age wrote into us to keep the species alive. Thanks for watching The First People. If you want to keep going, the next story is already waiting on your screen. Go see what else these endless winters made us.